In 722 BC, 10 tribes of Israel vanished into thin air. The official story? They dissolved into history, assimilated, gone forever. But DNA testing just proved that's a lie. The lost tribes weren't lost. They migrated south into Africa and survived for 2,700 years. In southern Africa, the Lemba people carry the exact genetic marker of Jewish priests. Over 50% match the Cohen modal haplotype, the DNA signature of Aaron's priestly line. In Ethiopia, Israel literally airlifted 100,000 Beta Israel Jews home because the evidence was undeniable. In Nigeria, the Igbo were practicing eighth-day circumcision and Torah dietary laws before Christian missionaries ever arrived. And here's what makes this explosive. Deuteronomy 28:68 predicted it 3,400 years ago. A prophecy describing slavery by ships that wouldn't happen until the transatlantic slave trade. The DNA evidence, the biblical prophecy, and the historical migration trail all point to the same conclusion they've been hiding. Let's expose what they buried. Move to southern Africa, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Mozambique, where you'll find the Lemba people. For generations, the Lemba have told the same story. We are the descendants of Jewish priests who fled Israel and migrated south into Africa over 2,000 years ago. They didn't just tell the story, they lived it. The Lemba don't eat pork. They practice ritual slaughter similar to kosher laws. They circumcise their sons. They observe a weekly day of rest. And their priestly clan, the Buba clan, claims direct descent from the Jewish priesthood. For centuries, anthropologists dismissed this as myth, African folklore, cultural borrowing from Christian missionaries. Until the 1990s, when geneticists decided to test their DNA. The results didn't just surprise the scientific community, they shattered the official narrative. Over 50% of Lemba men in the Buba priestly clan carry a Y chromosome marker called the Cohen modal haplotype. Let me be clear about what that means. This is the genetic signature of the ancient Jewish priestly line, the Kohanim, the direct male descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses. This marker appears in Jewish priestly families at rates of 45 to 50%. The Lemba Buba priests, over 50%, the same frequency. Now critics will say, well, that marker just shows Middle Eastern ancestry, not specifically Jewish. But here's what they can explain. Why would a random Middle Eastern genetic marker appear at priestly frequencies in a group that has maintained priestly customs, priestly oral traditions, and a priestly clan structure for over 2,000 years? The Lemba weren't just carrying Middle Eastern DNA. They were carrying the exact genetic signature that identifies Jewish priests, and they were carrying it in the exact clan that claimed to be priests. Their myth was DNA fact. The lab results validated their oral history with scientific precision. But the Lemba aren't alone. Move northeast to Ethiopia, to the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Jews. For centuries, they practiced a form of Judaism so ancient it predates the Talmud. They didn't know about Hanukkah because they were already in Africa before that holiday was established. They kept the Sabbath. They observed biblical dietary laws. They practiced ritual purity laws straight from Leviticus. Their tradition traces their lineage back to the tribe of Dan, who they believe fled south into Africa after the Assyrian conquest in 722 BC. Some also claim descent from the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon. For years, the debate raged. Were they really Israelites, or just Africans who adopted Jewish practices? The debate ended when the State of Israel officially recognized them as Jews under the law of return. And then Israel did something unprecedented. They launched two massive covert operations, Operation Moses in 1984 and Operation Solomon in 1991, airlifting over 100,000 Beta Israel out of Ethiopia and bringing them home to Israel. Think about that. The Israeli government doesn't spend millions of dollars on secret military airlifts and grant automatic citizenship unless the evidence is absolutely undeniable. Genetic studies confirmed it. The Beta Israel show higher levels of Middle Eastern DNA markers compared to their Ethiopian neighbors. They're not just culturally Jewish. They're genetically connected to the ancient Israelites. The Ethiopian government tried to stop the airlifts. The Israeli Air Force brought them home anyway. Because when the DNA, the customs, and the oral traditions all line up. You can't deny it anymore. But there's one more group that makes this undeniable. Now move west to Nigeria, to the Igbo people. The Igbo weren't discovered to be practicing Jewish customs by missionaries. They were already practicing them when the missionaries arrived in the 1400s and 1500s. Eighth-day circumcision, exactly as commanded in Genesis 17:12. Dietary laws prohibiting pork and shellfish, matching Leviticus 11. A weekly day of rest called Eek, their Sabbath. Ritual animal sacrifice and cleanliness laws that mirror the Torah. Clan names like Gad, Asher, Levi, and Zebulon, the exact names of Israelite tribes. When European explorers and missionaries first encountered the Igbo, they were shocked. These weren't converts. These were Africans practicing ancient Israelite customs that predated any Christian or Islamic influence in the region. The Igbo oral tradition is explicit. They are descendants of the tribe of Gad, who migrated south after the Assyrian conquest. Now, critics say, well, maybe they just borrowed these practices from traders or early Jewish merchants. But here's the problem with that theory. The Igbo were practicing biblical Judaism, the ancient form, not rabbinic Judaism. They didn't have the Talmud. They didn't know about post-temple traditions. They were practicing the religion as it existed before the Babylonian exile. You don't borrow an entire ancient religious system, complete with tribal names, genealogies, and pre-Talmudic practices, unless you're actually descended from that system. The Lemba have the DNA, the Beta Israel have the DNA and the Israeli recognition, the Igbo have the customs and the oral history. But here's what ties it all together and makes it biblical prophecy. Now here's where it becomes undeniable, where history meets prophecy. Deuteronomy 28:68. Moses is warning the Israelites what will happen if they break the covenant with God, and he gives them a very specific prophecy. The Lord will send you back in ships to Egypt, by a route that I said you should never see again. There you will offer yourselves for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you. Let me break down what makes this prophecy so precise. Back in ships to Egypt, not walking, not by land, by ships, across water, by a route you should never see again, a route they've never taken before. The Israelites left Egypt by land through the Red Sea. This prophecy describes a reverse journey, being taken back across water into bondage. Offer yourselves for sale as slaves, not conquered in war and enslaved, sold, commodified, traded. But no one will buy you. So many slaves that the market becomes saturated. Supply exceeds demand. Now let's look at history. Between the 1500s and 1800s, the transatlantic slave trade forcibly transported over 12 million Africans across the Atlantic Ocean in ships. They were sold as commodities, human cargo, in slave markets from Brazil to the Caribbean to North America. And by the peak of the trade, the market became so flooded that slavers literally threw enslaved Africans overboard because they couldn't sell them all. The supply exceeded the demand. No one will buy you. The Lemba, the Beta Israel, and the Igbo all lived in the regions that were heavily targeted by the slave trade: Southern Africa, East Africa, West Africa. The prophecy in Deuteronomy 28:68 describes a journey by ships into slavery, where they'd be sold, but the market would be saturated. The transatlantic slave trade fits that prophecy with historical precision. So let's bring it all together. The Lemba of Southern Africa carry the Cohen modal haplotype, the genetic signature of the Jewish priesthood. The Beta Israel of Ethiopia practiced ancient biblical Judaism for centuries, and Israel recognized them as legitimate descendants and brought them home in military airlifts. The Igbo of Nigeria were practicing eighth-day circumcision, Sabbath observance, and dietary laws before any European contact, and their tribal names matched the tribes of Israel. And all three groups lived in regions that were devastated by the transatlantic slave trade, a trade that matches the prophecy of Deuteronomy 28:68 with eerie precision. This isn't speculation. This is DNA evidence, historical documentation, and fulfilled prophecy. The Israelites didn't just disappear into Europe. They went south, into Africa, and their descendants are still here. The question isn't whether Africans are in the Bible. The question is, why has this evidence been ignored for so long? If this evidence challenges what you've been taught, good. That means you're thinking critically. If you want to see more biblical truths that have been hidden, erased, or rewritten, subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because we're not done exposing what they don't want you to know. Drop a comment below. Which group's evidence surprised you the most? The Lamba, the Beta Israel, or the Igbo? And if you found this video valuable, share it, because the truth doesn't spread itself. We have to spread it. I'll see you in the next one.